You know, back when I was in the academy, we would follow every toast with a song.
Hi everybody, welcome to Where No Bubs Has Gone Before, Star Trek The Next Generation podcast, hosted by me, Jay Reckward, and my father, Jake Reckward. We're recording this podcast for the benefit of my son, Benjamin, but we know there's so many great Star Trek fans out there that we're putting all the shows out on YouTube for free. How are you doing tonight, Jake?
I'm good, Jay, and you?
I'm doing really well. We're reviewing a really great episode tonight, and honestly, one of the episodes that every time it comes on, I stop and watch it, and so does Margot, who's Ben's mom. And we're reviewing Star Trek: The Next Generation Season 2, Episode 8, A Matter of Honor. This is in many ways the beginning of really what we have come to consider canon to the Klingons.
Right.
I think it's a really enjoyable episode about culture. In some ways, it's that Riker goes on an anthropological mission. But before we really dig into it, what do you think about this episode? Because, traditionally growing up, you were a big fan of Klingons as well.
Oh, I still am a big Klingon fan. I think it's a sort of, as you say, a Klingon episode.
Mm-hmm.
But it also has the theme. That's kind of the primary story. But then the secondary story of Ensign
Mendoc, yeah.
Mendon coming on board, where he's used to Benzite rules, how Benzite ships operate, and even though now he's a Starfleet officer, he hasn't served on a Star Trek, so he has different rules and a different culture and a different command structure to deal with. So the whole show, the whole episode is kind of based on how do different cultures adapt to one another? How do they learn can they learn from one another?
Exactly. It brings up actually a lot of interesting questions about I always find it interesting how cultures interact with each other when it comes to kind of the more human things that we share in common, like what we eat, what we talk about, our family structures. And there's just a lot of great things to dig into. So let's get into it. Like I'm very excited about this episode. So opening up, the USS Enterprise is passing Starbase 179 with some replacement crew due to come on board. As you mentioned, there is a Benzite among this replacement crew who is participating in the officer exchange program by the name of Mendon. Wesley at first, however, mistakes him for his friend Mordock that we met last season during the episode on Relva 7. I forget what it's called. It's where Wesley takes his Starfleet
right
entrance exam.
Yeah.
But Mendon reveals that he and Mordock are part of the same genetic geostructure. And, Wesley has this kind of awkward interaction where he asks how they tell each other apart, and Mendon says they simply do. But we quickly transition over to the Enterprise D's phaser range, where Riker and Captain Picard are getting in some phaser practice. Picard comments that Starfleet thinks it would be a good idea to send someone from the Enterprise to participate in this officer exchange program, and notes that the Klingon vessel, the IKS Pa, is in the area. Riker takes an immediate liking to it and volunteers, and that's where we get into the bulk of the story.
Well,
So,
I have to a story where I had an experience like that. Like it was in September of 1982, and a company I was working for, I was with the boss, and we were sitting together in a plane going from Baltimore to California, and we were expanding the organization in California. I said, somebody needs to go out there and pull this all together. I said, who's going to do it? And the person just looked at me. He was reading the paper, and he said, "Oh, I think I'd send you." And I thought, "Oh, you set this up, you son of a bitch." So we laughed. But
right.
so I've had that happen that way. So anyway,
I think it's a really good interaction between Riker and Picard because, as we've mentioned in previous episodes, there's a lot of interplay between them now that's much more friendly than the previous season. It's much looser and much more
yeah,
brotherly than it is
right, yes,
subordinate and commander.
right.
And I think it actually also shows that like Picard is looking out for Riker in some ways in terms of progressing his career. And he knows that this could be really invaluable for Will to go and serve on this ship. Um, I think that I just want to take aside for a moment and talk about the phaser range itself. I find the I find it interesting because, they have a holodeck where you would think that they would be able to simulate, and we've actually seen this. They've simulated combat situations, especially with the Worth's calisthenics program. I would think that they would incorporate the holodeck into their military training, including phaser practice, instead of having what seems to be a separate room.
Well, did I had the same thought? Like, where is this? Because it looks like it's a pretty large three-dimensional space.
Right.
So, so maybe I mean, was it actually on the holodeck, and they just didn't cover that point?
So I tried to, from my own memory, I tried to recount all the other times I've seen like the phaser range, and the only other time I remember is a interaction between Worf and Guinan on it. Um, but other than that, like there are some other alternative rooms for physical play on the Enterprise, including there's Anjojitsu, Anbojitsu, which Riker and his father take part in a future
Yeah,
episode.
yeah,
Like
right.
they have an entire arena built
Yeah,
for Anbojitsu on
right,
the Enterprise that's just randomly there.
right.
But again, I think we also have to remember that this is a ship with more than 1,000 people. There is very much a city aspect to it, as well as a floating hospital and a military command center and a battleship. Um,
And there's different human races and different alien races,
exactly.
or different human cultures and different alien cultures on the Enterprise. Right.
Well, we're gonna have a future episode in this season. I forget which one it is, but at one point Data goes and visits Geordi in the barber shop. So like there's a barber shop on board the Enterprise as well.
Oh yes, it was some blue man, blue barber. Yes.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I find it interesting that Starfleet takes kind of these steps to not, Picard says in other episodes very clearly that Starfleet's not a military organization. So in some ways they set up their ships to reflect, I guess, the community that they see on Earth. Because if you look at, and I'm sorry, folks, I'm using because a lot tonight. I'll try to stop. I mentioned this uh, because got me. Because on Deep Space Nine, one of the things that happens when the Enterprise comes and takes over the space station, which is previously a Kardashian, I'm sorry, Kardashian, our Cardassian mining complex. Margaret and I were talking about the Kardashians earlier tonight, folks, but that's fun too. But before that, it was a mining complex, so it wasn't built for entertainment and culture and having people actually live there as a functioning space station to protect
Right.
Bajor. It was
Right.
there for like an actual fit and function. I find it interesting that Starfleet actually goes out of its way to build these kind of structures within something so important like the flagship of their fleet. What do you think of that? And why do you think they would do that?
Do the specific questions about
Why do
the,
you think that they would build so many kind of amenities aboard a flagship?
well, we know that they have 1,100 people, and there's different people there, and they're out in the galaxy for long periods of time. A lot of them seem to never get you know off the ship. There's not they're not stopping somewhere and doing rotational shore leave like they did on the NX-01 and so
Well,
forth.
I,
So
I,
so
I do
maybe it's part of that.
I do want to stop you there because there is something you mentioned in the notes when you said Starbase 79. How many star bases are there?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
You know, I think if we look at like Star Trek Enterprise, by the time when Archer's out there, he doesn't have a star base to head to.
No.
Um, when Kirk is out there, um, there are star bases for him to go to, but they seem to be like far away, or they seem to be built on the edges of the space that he's exploring in the Alpha Quadrant.
Or in some cases, are they on planets? Actually, they're not. In
True, yeah.
yeah.
Well, there's going to be an episode here. Oh, the previous episode that we just reviewed. Um, I think Darwin Station is actually built on the planet.
Is on a planet, right? Yeah.
Right. So I'm imagining at this point, there's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of star bases throughout the Alpha Quadrant. And if you think about it, if you had an advanced society in the future that was capable of interstellar travel and defending and maintaining interstellar territory, um, you would not only want to spread out your population throughout the galaxy, not in case something cataclysmic happens, but at the same time, like you will probably need the economic and infrastructure of all those star bases across the galaxy to keep things like trade and commerce going, and just getting people from place to place.
Hmm.
At the
Hmm.
same time, I have to imagine by now, and we never really get, I think, a real accurate count until DS9. But how big is the fleet? And if it's big enough, like you probably need that many star bases to maintain a fleet of ships that sometimes seems to rely on aging vessels.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
we've seen that previously, them rely on kind of older design starships
Right.
to
Right.
supplement what they're doing.
Yes.
Um, so let's talk about Mendon real quick and like some uh the Benzonite culture. They of course are from the planet Benzar, and it seems like there was a question that you asked about whether the geostructure is a city. Part of me thinks that the geostructure is actually like they seem to be like almost an insect like race in the fact that they breed in the hundreds, if not thousands, and maybe these geostructures are like hives.
I hadn't thought about that. I thought it was an interesting word. I just kind of took it simply for simplicity's sake as city, but and I really didn't give much thought as to the benzites are obviously humanoid, but you know, what was the environment that caused them to evolve in that way with their, the way their facial structures were, and that they needed that, what turns out to be an oxygen concentrator and so forth. So
Right.
you bring up some interesting, going beyond the episode, doing a world building. Like, okay, he mentioned geostructure. What does that mean? What does that mean from a physical plant standpoint? What does it mean from a social standpoint?
So
That's a very good idea. Very good
I
thought.
looked it up on Memory Alpha, and the
Yeah.
the only definition it gives is two sentences. Um, so here's the official definition of the geostructure according to Memory Alpha. A geostructure was part of Benzite society. Benzites from the same geostructure, such as Mordock and Mendon, tended to look alike, and that's all that they have there. So whatever there is to extrapolate from that, I guess we'll never know. But from what I understand, from what I'm kind of deducing, is that if Mendon and Mordock look alike, and it's because they're from the same geostructure, there has to be something going on at that Benzite geostructure on Benzar, where their genetic compatibility is being matched in some way, or they're being paired up, or they're from the same.
They have
They're cousins in some way.
a very common gene, very concentrated gene pool. Yeah,
Right.
I guess. Right. Yeah.
Well, I wonder what that means about, their if they're going out into space and they're interacting with other species and cultures now, including having officer exchange programs. I wonder if there is a problem with genetic variability in Benzite culture at some point, because
Yeah.
I I've been reading a little bit about exobiology and just some of the theories around what life would look like on other planets and what intelligent life would possibly look like. One thing that people don't take for, well, a lot of people take for granted about humans is that one of the beauties of our species is that we are able to go out and procreate with people from different environments and we were able to mate with Neanderthals. So it's important to recognize that we are able as a species to go out and spread our genetic variables and our genetic uniqueness among many different people, among many different communities. And it seems in Star Trek that humans have been able to go out and actually have children with other aliens. I would think at some point that a society would break down because it would lose its genetic variability, and it would actually behoove them to go out into space and find another society that they would actually be able to genetically procreate with, and maybe not continue, like, maybe humanity doesn't continue and maybe the betazoids don't continue, but the hybridization of the humans and the betazoids are what's created out of that, and they continue for the next
Well,
10,000 years. Or
it's a little bit what we're come to understand about our current modern genome, that, we were Homo erectus and then Homo
right.
sapiens and so forth. And as we, been able to uh, get some samples, I guess, from, old cells and bone from, uh, fossils that are literally thousands of years old, particularly the Denisovans and the Neanderthal, we're
Hmm.
finding that, that they did have their genes were different. And so they had unique genes to them. And we're finding that we do have a certain amount, and of course varies by individual based on heredity. But we have a certain percentage of Neanderthal and probably Denisovan genes. And I was
Hmm.
just thinking, there might be some other human subspecies that really haven't been identified yet. You
Well,
know?
I think the reason, and there's a really great book out there called Sapiens by
Oh
Yuval
yes,
Harari.
right.
Um, I really do think that one of the big genetic blessings that humans have is our ability to go and be able to procreate with so many different people. And I think we take that for granted. And part of the reason we take that for granted is that I think there's some natural xenophobia in the modern world that hopefully we get through. Because in the future, folks, it seems like the people in Starfleet have gotten past that xenophobia, at least when it comes to, like, their average everyday human, which we should all be doing. But I think being able to go out there and spread the genetic variability and then not only interact with other races is something that I think a lot of interstellar societies would start doing, um, as as a concentrated, acknowledged thing that their society's taking part in. Like even the Klingons. The Klingons are willing to culturally mix now in some ways, and we know that they can have children with humans too, because we meet many characters, including Kalar, who is a half human
Hmm.
in a future episode.
Right. Right.
So, jumping off from there, Uh, let let's finish talking about Mendon for a second. One of the big issues that he runs into is that once all the officers are transferred to the different ships and Riker goes off to the PA, during the episode, Mendon is scanning the ship from the science station where he's been stationed, and he notices that there is a subatomic bacteria on the hull of the ship that is essentially eating away at the duranium.
Right.
First, let's get into the ridiculousness of fake
Exactly.
science and sci-fi. What the hell is a subatomic bacteria or a submicron form?
Right. I mean, there's nothing to discuss here other than the writers wanted to have something exotic. So they come up with the idea of a subatomic bacteria, which just like, how can you have a subatomic structure that had any semblance of life? I mean, these are smaller than viruses even. So it's like, it might be possible somehow, but it's like, well, what are we going to call this? Well, let's just make up this name. And, well, does it have any scientific sense? No, and we don't care. That's what they did.
The hilarious, absolutely, that's what they did. Maurice Hurley and Gene Roddenberry were probably sitting in the back having smoking a blunt, and someone
Right.
came up with subatomic bacteria.
Yeah.
The funny thing now is that I don't think. I don't know. I think it's going to be very hard for us to discover subatomic bacteria anytime soon. So, like, for purposes of now and the present, it seems like a sci-fi idea.
The only interesting thing is, that people, chemists, I guess to be chemists, they have been able to build nanomachines from
Right.
single atoms. So
Right.
it's like, where does that go? How do you, and and we'll get into future episodes, the nanites, these nano beings and so forth.
Right.
And they
Well,
have
even the Borg.
intelligence.
The Borg are use nanites to
Right,
infect.
right. Yes.
Yeah.
So you've got this. So maybe we shouldn't completely dismiss the concept of subatomic bacteria when we have chemists building machines out of literally a dozen atoms.
Very true. Well, like, it's important to realize and remember that science is a process of determining and evaluating the world. An
Yes,
important part of science is always being open to new information and new evidence,
correct.
and being willing to change your opinion when the new evidence teaches you something otherwise than what you've been
Yes,
taught to believe.
right,
Um, and that's a very important thing. If you're
right.
listening, Ben, um, a lot of people will teach you some different things, but so the problem presented by the subatomic bacteria ties into the story of how Mendon has to learn Enterprise procedures. But I thought one of the issues with Mendon in terms of learning Enterprise procedures is that there there's nothing really clear about how the rules are presented to him. They just say, like, you should have been told this at your indoctrination when he screws up in terms of not reporting immediately to the higher officer in command or the captain when it came to the discovery of the subatomic bacteria. Um, it seems that
I made the comp.
he
Yeah,
just doesn't understand the typical chain of command.
I think the whole premise was kind of ridiculous as I think through it
Yeah, I'm
because when they use the term indoctrination, he's a
right.
Starfleet officer. He should have known what the rules. Starfleet is predominantly human, it seems, so he should have, you know, picked up on what the communication patterns were and all that sort of thing. And the other thing about Mendon is they wrote the character that he was very self assured. So
Hmm.
he's looking at things and saying, "Oh, we could make this better. Oh, we can make that better."
To the
And
point of arrogance.
yes, very arrogant. Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, it also, they apparently in Benzite culture have this. common practice where they don't bring up a problem unless they already have a solution to present.
That's an interesting point. Yes,
And it's
right.
a very and to me that says something in. It's funny that we're talking about Klingon anthropology tonight when it seems like we're going to be doing Benzonite anthropology first.
Hmm.
It seems like the Benzonite culture is built on this idea of individual achievement and
Hmm.
being able to individually stand out,
Hmm.
even though they are from what we've interpreted or I have interpreted as a genetic geostructure where they
They're
all
all
look and
similar. Yeah.
so maybe one thing that should be considered when it comes to the Benzonites on Benzar is that there might be a hyper competitive culture on Benzar where because everyone's so similar,
It's a
there
good
is
point.
this
Yeah.
there's this desperate competition to stand out. So no one says anything until they're absolutely sure that they're either going to be covered or they're going to win
Right.
something from it.
Right. Yeah.
And it says something interesting about their chain of command too, because that means like their chain of command has to be very mercurial,
Hmm.
and just like the Klingons, it's very backstabbing. But we'll
Hmm.
get into that here in a second.
Right.
What do you think about the general reaction and treatment to Mendon when he commits kind of like these officer faux pas, especially his interactions with Worf?
Um, I think that the established crew and the Enterprise were extremely tolerant, and
Yes.
I think that Picard's admonishment of Mendon was very mild because
Yes.
he really did put the ship in danger.
Oh, he put the ship in very extreme danger if
And
we really think about
right, and he caused a problem with
it.
the
Very
Klingons
extreme.
by having that hypersensitive probing of what the anomaly was on their hull.
Um, I think one thing that is very apparent when it comes to the benzites, um, and it might be something we run into in the future if we actually run into alien civilization, is their establishment of values. Because to them, or to Mendon, not reporting that, he didn't see any immediate danger. So it
Hmm.
makes you wonder, like, if you're on a benzite ship, and let's say they're dealing with this issue, like, how long does it take them to really deal with it, or does the subatomic bacteria just eat away at the ship and they're all fucked? Like,
It would make not having some sort of defined command structure versus somewhat chaos you know, would not allow an unknown situation like this that would lead to disaster, would not allow it to be dealt with very well.
true. Well, like, it seems like at least on the bridge of the Enterprise, the crew puts the safety of the crew first, and
Yes.
it doesn't seem like Mendon comes from a culture that does that. Which I,
Doesn't seem to.
which I think says something very interesting when we actually compare Riker's experience with the Klingons, which we'll
Hmm.
jump into right now because that's really the bulk of what we're
Right. Right.
here to talk about. So the after the phaser range, we're taught a little bit about Klingon cuisine because Riker has one final meal at 10 Forward where he tries a bunch of different Klingon dishes. And it's actually a really cool scene where
Hmm.
we have some fun interplay between Riker, Pulaski, and Picard. And now, it's important to note that Pulaski is now a fixture and a point when the captain's in the room, where previously they really did try to keep them separate in terms of the storytelling. Um, I really like this scene. I think it says something about kind of everyone's camaraderie, and it also says something about I think I think the fact that Will Riker's actually the first thing that he was worried about is like how I'm going to eat, and he's just like, well, I guess I'll find out before I get there. And he actually sits down and starts eating Klingon food. I think that's really cool.
Well, it was really smart in that he knew he had access to information about their cuisine and knew it
Right.
was different enough. So rather than just going into the mess hall of the PA and being not having any idea what Tibius Claw or Goth was like and so forth, he would experience it. He wouldn't be surprised. And
Right.
it's really interesting because it was almost like with the preponderance and popularity of all the foodie shows that compare different cuisines, like Anthony Bourdain and
Mm-hmm.
Feed Phil, and all these different shows that doing fusion cuisines, and we've talked about this before. If you go back to 1970, American cuisine was really boring. I mean, the only thing that
Yeah.
was really really good was probably soul food and
Mm-hmm.
Southern food, and that could be a subject of a different podcast from the Netflix series High on the Hog, which presents the idea that a lot of American cuisine came from Africa through the slaves.
Oh, absolutely.
But
And there's also a lot of huge Latin influences too.
yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But I think that scene in 10 Forward where um, Riker is trying all these dishes and it introduces us to them was really fun.
Yeah. Well, I actually kind of want to jump ahead to the actual mess hall scene aboard the PA and continue the
Yes,
conversation about the food because,
right.
the mess hall scene is wonderful and it shows Klingons kind of unbridled in their most natural state, kind of noisily eating and conversing among themselves. Um, you and I used to visit a Chinese marketplace in Cary, North Carolina, where a lot of immigrants would actually go and eat. And one thing that we always noticed was like the noise that they would make eating their noodles. There's a lot of loud slurping in Asian culture that
Hmm.
is accepted as just the typical part of a meal. Just like in
Hmm.
other parts of the world, burping is not seen as this kind of impolite thing to do. It's actually seen as a compliment.
Hmm.
Um, I think that this scene is really great because not only do they have a lot of fun interplay, the Klingons are kind of enchanted with this idea of this human readily eating their food. But I also think it says something interesting about Klingon culture. And since we're here to talk about Klingons, let's dig into it, starting with their food. What do you notice about their food? And it's something that I noticed immediately. And I was wondering if you picked up on it.
Very hunter
Exactly.
not even hunter gatherer, but hunter oriented.
It's a very carnivorous diet, it seems.
Yes, yes,
And I think
right.
that says a lot about like the environment the Klingons actually naturally involved in, that they are eating a lot of meat and protein
and
as
and
main
right,
staples of their diet.
and which fits in with being energetic warrior culture.
Well, it fits into being an energetic warrior culture, but I think evolutionarily it says something very
It,
interesting about like
yeah.
Klingons developing on Kronos and what they probably had to subsist on in
Hmm.
their natural environment.
Hmm.
We have as humans an omnivorous diet because we were able to evolve teeth that not only were able to shred meat and pierce meat, but also mash and chew and masticate vegetables and tougher root
Hmm.
materials.
Hmm.
Our teeth are real evolutionary marvels.
They
And
are.
if you look at Klingon teeth as they've often been depicted, they're often depicted as kind of pointed and sharp. And it's very clear that the designers of Klingons have made them out to be like an intergalactic, almost predator race. Like
Hmm.
they're not only a warrior race, they're a hunter race too.
Yes, yes.
Um, and it's interesting, even to the point where like they have talked about eating roasted heart of targ before, and many of them actually keep targs as their pets.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever life that the Klingons are living on, like their home planet of Kronos, it has to be incredibly brutal,
Mm-hmm.
where it really is probably dog eat dog, literally. It doesn't seem like they're growing any food or eating any sort of vegetative matter, from my understanding, and
No,
even like
no,
insects. Like it's. Do you think they call Goss serpent worms? Do you
right.
think that they're snakes, like a reptilian snake, or do you think that they're a worm?
I think it's some sort of unusual worm in their
Yeah.
world. And, one of the things I put in the notes that I had an experience with that in China, where I was in Beijing and, I was with a group of Chinese people. One gentleman was Chinese American who spoke English, of course, and Mandarin. And they brought in this one dish, and I saw it was moving. And I said to one guy, I said, what is that? He says, oh, drunken shrimp. So it's these small freshwater shrimp. They're kind of greenish in color, maybe an inch, 2 inches, inch and a half, 2 inches long. And they put them in some sort of soy sauce. I think there was alcohol in it too. And so they take the lid off and they're kicking around. I said, are they still alive? I said, yeah. You just put your chopsticks in and pop one in your mouth. So
Yeah.
the first one I did, I just bit the head off. Figured I have to kill it first, and it was actually
Well,
good. And then the ones after that, I just put the whole thing in my mouth and chewed it up.
well, a lot of people are eating cicadas now, and there has
Oh
been
yes,
a big move to eat things like cockroaches and grasshoppers and all sorts of things in the last few years. Um, I think that a diet built on edible insects is probably more natural to us than we realize in our hereditary past. Um,
well, if insect protein can provide the same amino acids that pork and beef and
mhm.
mutton can and so forth, then ecologically it would be much better because what you'd have to feed them to breed them would be not as much as fodder that it takes for cows and sheep and
Right.
uh, pigs and that sort of thing. Plus, you wouldn't have the um, greenhouse gases. All these, animals are producing a hell of a lot of methane coming out of their guts.
Well, you would actually want to have a regenerative biome that these
Yes,
insects that were existing in, so they would be able to mate and propagate more.
right.
So, if we had a more insect-based diet, and it's kind of a gross thing to think about it, but um, having a stable protein source, and everything tastes like chicken. Um, I would think that part of any culture that uses insects as a stable protein source would also be taking part in some sort of regenerative farming practice.
Oh,
So maybe I
yes.
have to step back from my previous statement. If the Klingons are harvesting these serpent worms for Ga, they might actually be farming them. So there might actually be some sort of protein farming on
Yeah.
Kronos.
Yes. Right. They're probably raised them. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, it's probably like, getting back to Targs. I bet you there's like just hordes of, I mean, herds of Targs probably across Kronos that are just probably picked off every day for food. And also, we've never really established what are they fermenting when they make blood wine.
Hmm.
I would have to
Yeah.
imagine it's actual blood at this
Something
point.
like that. Yeah. Fermented blood. Yeah.
So,
Something.
you know, the main theme of this episode is that different cultures with different rules um, often need the ability to adapt, and an exposure to each other allows for the acceptance of others and an enhancement of a larger society as a whole. And that is also connected to your comment, as you previously mentioned about the Netflix documentary High on the Hog. But, the thing that's at stake here is Riker running up against Klingon culture and the expectations that he's supposed to serve according to those values versus the values that he's been kind of engendered to hold dear to him in Starfleet. And
Well,
one of the
just
clear ones before
go ahead.
I let Worf, right before Commander Riker leaves, Worf provides Riker with an emergency transmitter that's key to the story, but also will allow Worf to beam Riker out in case Riker gets in a dangerous situation.
Right.
Um,
That's key.
because Worf reveals that Riker becoming the commander on the Paw, one of his responsibilities is to actually murder his captain if a mutiny takes place. And at the same time, there should be the expectation that a second officer, played by the great Brian Thompson, who serves as the Klingon Kargan, or is it
The captain, Cargan, or the first off,
no
the
the
second
first officer
officer,
Clag, the second officer
Clag. Right.
Clag.
Yes.
Brian Thompson plays Clag, and Brian
Right.
Thompson's a great actor. But there's the expectation that if Riker
Right.
kills Kargan and becomes captain,
Right.
Eventually Clag will kill Riker if need be and become captain as well.
What goes back to you said that it just seems like Klingon culture is very dog eat dog.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's politics that include, stabbing somebody, hitting somebody in the chest with uh, a bat lift or something like that. The other
Well,
interesting thing that ties that you mentioned the second officer Clag. That one thing that ties together is, I think I got this right, when Riker first shows up in on the bridge of the Pa. Uh, Clog doesn't accept him, and
no.
and Riker realizes what he needs to do. He, you know, beats the hell out of Clag and throws him into the panel, and Sparks come out and says, "Are you going to accept my orders?" And he says, "Yes." So the way that worked in Klingon culture, Riker earned the respect not just of Clag but of Corrigan and the other officers on the bridge. So that,
Right.
I think that led into when they were in the mess hall, and there's two Klingon females there. It was they Riker built respect for himself because he knew their food, he ate their food. That was a very bonding experience, and they sort of accepted him, that he wasn't standoffish and so forth. And the other thing was
And he could
just the
defend himself. He could defend
yes,
himself if need
and
be.
right, and the bonding that they had for the humor that was
Right.
demonstrated while they were eating, that was very important. And then, of course, in the very end, after Kargan takes the pod back to destroy the Enterprise because he doesn't understand what's going on, and you know, uh, Kargan is transported onto the bridge of the Enterprise, and everything gets. Then Riker's be able to work things out directly with Picard, and then when Kargan is beamed back, um, and Riker knows he's going to get slugged by Kargan, and he does. And Clag helps him up and says, "You understand Klingon very, very well." And Riker says to Clag, "Thank you, my friend." And that's,
Yeah.
he leaves. So there was a really good cultural exchange and personal exchange, not just with Clag, but with Kargan also, actually.
Well, I think it's interesting that we live in a society where we look at violence as this very important practice. Before we started the podcast, we were talking about, um, a lot of the mass shootings that are going on right now in the United States here in 2021. And this episode is being recorded in June. Um, you mentioned that in Klingon society, the idea of someone showing up and like putting a batleth in your chest and killing you is acceptable. In today's society, I think that we would look at Klingons and just be absolutely horrified by the way we are now because, in their society, that sort of unmitigated violence is permissible. to the point where, like, Riker literally beat it. He doesn't just beat the hell out of Clag. He beats the hell out of Clag so badly he damages the ship. Like,
Yes, right.
um, there's kind of a level of militarism and that warriorism that we've been talking about that is so pervasive that even when Riker gets in there, he understands immediately that violence is a key to mobility among this crew, and that if
Right.
I don't exercise it, I'm going to be in more trouble if I don't exercise violence than if I try to remain at peace with all my fellow crewmates.
Right. Right.
And I think that that is a very difficult thing that modern society never really comes to grasp with. I don't think that we talk about how violence actually does have and play a societal role in shaping our culture and shaping each other's individuals. And it seems in the future that the Starfleet officers are at least are able to recognize that, like, violence is an acceptable part of some other cultures, and if I'm going to survive in these other cultures, I need to be able to accept that I have to do things that, while I might think abhorrent, they do not.
Well, it brings up some very interesting considerations. You look at Western culture versus the radical Islamicist culture.
Right,
Very different. What's happening in this country now between Democrats and Republicans, and even
right,
Democrats and some Republicans, and those who actually believe in QAnon and so forth.
right.
Um, it's just a big cultural difference. And the point is, what you come back into violence is that a high level of violence and a high level of just brutality was part and parcel of radical Islam. And unfortunately, those people that still persist in the QAnon beliefs, there's, some concern that they are moving in that sort of direction toward,
Well,
if they can't change things by storming the Capitol, then they'll do it violently.
I have always held the belief that one of the big ills of modern Western society is that we don't have a real incorporation of the darker side of the human psyche. Like, we don't really have a serious conversation about sex because we think that it's kind of forbidden to have it because there's some dark aspects to sex when we really talk about it honestly. At the same time, when it comes to violence, there's some really dark aspects to violence that we actually find good that we don't want to publicly talk about. I think, however, if we don't talk about them and if we don't talk about violence as maybe a positive force to be controlled and cultivated and reconsidered in society, I think that you end up with the situation we have now where people don't aren't able to properly frame their emotions, and you end up with people suffering terrible mental illness and they end up picking up a gun because they feel societal alienation, and they go out there and they commit these horrendous crimes. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have not properly framed violence in a way of when do you, when is it appropriate for someone to be violent. I know many people that would say it is never appropriate to be violent. But deep down inside, I think we all know that's not true.
Well, one of the things that, since I went to a Jesuit college, um, I was not Roman Catholic. So I did not have to take a theology course, which was very good because it was comparative religion. But everybody had to take an ethics course. So it was very, Roman Catholic and so forth. There was a little problems here and there. Even some Roman Catholics had problem with it. But one of the things they talked about, which was a valid discussion, was the morality is war totally immoral, or are there situations where war can be morally justified? And the answer was yes.
Well, in the same
And this
vein,
and this was a very interesting conversation because the class I was in didn't we weren't allowed to debate that much, but if the professor would have been more younger and less set in his ways, it would have been very interesting to have a discussion because this is 1974.
oh
So
yeah,
Vietnam was just winding down. Is what the war we've been in since 1965, is that moral? Is that morally justified, Father uh, Higgins? We never had that conversation. But the point
right.
is that in some cases, violence, I think, is justifiable, morally justifiable.
Well, like in the case of self-defense, if you know someone is coming at you in the street and they're intending to kill or seriously harm you, and you have no choice but to defend yourself violently, what choice do you really have? It it's also kind of, I think when we choose to not talk about violence in a serious and adult way that values it as something not as an automatic negative, I think we're actually denying a lot of our human development. We didn't we didn't tame our environment by making friends with bears and saber-toothed tiger and the gazelle. Like our early history was a violent one where we literally ran animals down. Like on our feet, we would run them down for miles and miles until they tired out from exhaustion, and then we would pounce on them and eat them raw. What I'm describing is one of the most violent things that you can imagine that we often see animals doing. And I think that we try to have this division between the animal and the human, often forgetting that, like, humans acted like animals so much in
Well,
our
but
early history that,
and what have humans done to humans for thousands of years and continue to do so today?
right. And to act like violence is something that is absolutely forbidden is just cognitively dishonest, I think. So I think Klingon culture is interesting because on one hand, they do have this like widespread acceptance of like high violence, but at the same time, it's kind of bound in this idea that like you're only allowed to be violent if you have this honorable reason.
That's where, yes, that's where the honor, their sense of honor, their system of honor really comes into play and puts some control, so that it's just not total chaos.
Well, I kind of want to jump back to an episode we recorded last season for Heart of Glory, which is
Mhm.
also a big Klingon episode. There's that scene when the two Klingons have escaped the brig and they run into Worf and Tasha Yar in the hallway. And
Right,
at one point, this little girl walks out, and one of the
right,
Klingons picks her up, and Tasha worries that they're suddenly going to have a hostage situation.
right,
And Worf makes the point after the Klingon gives up the little girl, like Klingons don't take hostages. You know,
right,
on one hand, that is saying, these are violent individuals. If they were really going to do something to that little girl, they would have killed her. But
right,
because they're honorable and they don't think that they should kill children, they gave her up.
right. Yes.
You know, on one hand, I just had this kind of moment where we talked about, the positive side of violence. There's also this kind of weird restraint that the Klingons have placed upon themselves, where they try to find a way to make violence permissible, but they also have so many safeguards, it seems, even aboard their ship, um, so that things don't get terribly out of hand.
I just think a larger way to think of violence as being natural to some degree. The creative process involves destruction. You have
Yeah.
to tear down the old to build the new. And in some case, I mean, if you just look at how new stars are born or how stars die out and then are recycled into new stars,
Hmm.
those images that come back from the Hubble Space Telescope are immensely beautiful. but the amount of energy that's being released and the violence that's going on, the
Oh
beautiful
yeah.
violence that's going on there. I mean, if anything's violent, it's this destruction and then creation of new stars.
Well, one thing that I think that we take for granted about this universe is how truly chaotic and dangerous it is.
Yes,
And I
right.
think in many ways we don't consider that because if you really do take time to consider it and think about it, I mean, we've talked about this previously on a philosophical level, but like, we know that there's going to be a heat death to this universe one day where everything is basically going to be dead anyway because there's not going to be any heat to keep anything alive. You know, philosophically and existentially, that could put you in a very, very dark place. But it's also kind of a reflection of how the universe actually is. And
Hmm.
I think, if you accept that kind of chaos and that kind of. I don't think that that kind of chaos and that kind of brutal nature automatically means that the universe has to be bleak or sad or terrible. I think it automatically comes down to, like, what is valued. And I think, really what is talked about here in this episode, A Matter of Honor, is like, how is honor valued among the two different cultures? Because on one hand, like, honor is held by the Starfleet officer to be helping your comrades, even if they're a stranger. Because the Enterprise, once they discovered the subatomic bacteria, immediately sets course to rescue the Pa. Where the Klingons, when they discover the hole in their hull caused by the subatomic bacteria, immediately assumed that it was placed there by the Enterprise, and they immediately turn course to find the Enterprise so they can attack them.
Hmm.
And I think it has really. I think this episode does a good job of examining how we perceive honor in terms of our own self identities. Honor for, I think, the Starfleet officer is the assumption that, like, if something's wrong, it's my duty to be bound to help.
Hmm.
Where in Klingon culture, it seems like honor is if someone messes with my personal authority or my personal autonomy, it is up to me to defend it, even to the most extreme measure of killing them or losing
Hmm.
my own life in the process. Because
Hmm.
the Warrior Society has such a emphasis on dying honorably in combat, even to the point where, like, Clark's father, who failed to die in combat after he was
Right,
captured by the Romulans, lives in exile, waiting
right.
to die of old age, which to me seemed like kind of a bullshit story because it's like, well, wait a second. If he got out of prison and he's not uninjured and he's not maimed, like, what's stopping him from getting back on a ship and getting into the battle? Like, it, unless he's psychologically scarred from prison, which in that case, you know, they've never dealt with PTSD really yet in Klingon culture. And I have to
Doesn't
admit,
right.
well, one thing that I often wonder when it comes to our culture and American culture, and this gets into the question at the end of your notes about American exceptionalism. One thing that I don't think we take into account is how much trauma is built into our national conscious, and how much we try to lionize and accept that trauma is actually something good. We paint trauma as something beneficial or honorable or something to be commended. And I think in many ways this country has been dealing with its own case of post traumatic stress disorder, but not looking at it that way. Especially when we talk about the issues of race here in America, in terms of how we've treated certain communities.
Well, my comments in the notes about American exceptionalism relative to um, different cultures having contact with one another and understanding each other. There are a lot of Americans who think that, America is the greatest country on the planet. and thus there is no necessity of trying to understand a culture in another part of the world or another
Right.
country. They think that we're the best, so everybody should understand and emulate us. And to a large extent, many countries do that. All
Right.
countries do that to some extent. But some of that exceptionalism that causes isolationism um, is I don't see as good, because it gives a very skewed perception of life on the planet. What is it? Only 5% of the population is in the United States. So, there's the bulk of people are out there. And, particularly in developing countries, you talk about, you know, the problems of homelessness and people not having enough to eat and poverty in this country, and there are real problems. However, you need to have the perspective of what poverty and prevalence of disease is like in other
Oh,
countries. And
since we're talking about
there's just no comparison.
violence, the prevalence of violence in other countries compared to this country, even with our current epidemic of mass shootings, if you go to parts of the second and third world, the level of violence there is so out of anything that an American can even come to
I mean,
comprehend.
what's happened in Syria the last 10 years, what has been going on in Afghanistan since 1980, since the Soviet invasion, uh, you know, stuff that
Oh,
goes, I think there's a lot of, Boko Haram in Nigeria and so on.
hmm
Um,
oh, well, we had a conversation recently about Central America as it pertains to immigration at the border. And a lot of those people, so, one thing that Trump liked to bring up when he was president was a lot of these people from MS-13 are coming over the border. Well, like, a lot of people don't realize that MS-13 started in, I think it was an Ecuadorian prison, but it started in a Central American prison, and the people that are coming out of these prisons are coming to America and starting these gangs. And this is in no way going to turn into an anti-immigrant screed, folks, but like, we have to put into perspective, like, these people are coming out of countries where the violence is so interlaced with their daily lives that they don't have the sense of just relative calm that we do, because they've never had that.
yeah, one of the things we talked about is that there was some interview with some people, parents from Guatemala, and
Right.
he said that, look, when we could try to get into the U.S. or we send our children, we think that even if we get there or our children get there and they're put in basically an American jail, that life is better than what we have in Guatemala.
Right.
And that's the difference. That's the difference in culture and society and economics and so forth, and feeling of safety that many Americans in our exceptionalism, which is true to some extent, cannot comprehend. Thus, they have a very incomplete understanding and perspective of a problem like the illegal immigration over the Mexican border.
Well, you know, people don't understand that if you put people in a negative environment and you keep them there, there's going to be negative outcomes. The people that are fleeing Central America and Mexico and trying to get over our border, these are people that are trying to flee some of the worst human atrocities that are happening every day in front of them. And one of the things, and I hate to bring him up again, but one of the things that the former president was famous for saying for when he was running his first campaign was like, they're not bringing their best, they're bringing murderers and rapists. That's basically what he called them. But the truth is, none of these immigrants, the majority of them are not murderers and rapists. They're victims. They're victims trying to escape the worst hell on earth. Compared to what anything we've experienced, it's hell compared to what most of us have experienced. And I
Hmm.
think when you put that into perspective, the entire conversation about, you know, who's coming into the country is really kind of a cruel one, because the truth is the people that are coming into the country are refugees. Like that's who we're taking in. We're taking in refugees. We're taking in people that are who want to come here because they know it's better here than the hellhole they came from. And I think that we lose sight of that so often, and we kind of lose sight of it in terms of how wonderful this country is, because people want to come here because they don't have to worry about there being like just unmitigated, thoughtless violence every day that they're going through, or poverty, or disease, or starvation and suffering. I'm sorry, I think we got off on a weird tangent a
No,
little
but
bit.
no, it doesn't, because one of the things I wrote is that the theme of this episode was different cultures with different rules, and there needs to be an ability to adapt, and that exposure to other cultures allows for acceptance of others and an enhancement of a larger society. And I think we were talking, a month ago, I don't know if it was part of a podcast episode or not, but there was in National Geographic, there was a program where somebody was trying to ask individuals, whether they were black or white or whatever, in 6 words, what their thought was, or primary thought about racial issues. And mine was, it was 6 words. I think I told you this. My 6 words would be, I am not afraid of the other. Well, that's seven words. But I'm
Yeah,
not afraid of others. That's six
yeah,
words. Because I can remember growing up in the late 1950s in Baltimore City, that, without going into detail, and that my parents didn't do this, was other kids in the neighborhood. I was taught to be afraid of Negroes.
yeah.
And so that, when I thought about this whole National Geographic program, which is like tens of thousands of responses to this challenge, um, it's a matter of not being afraid of others,
Yeah.
with different attitudes, with different sexual orientations, with um,
Gender
people that
identities and
gender identities, or people that are Berbers in Morocco versus Egyptian Arabs versus Saudi Arabs versus
right.
Islamic Bangladeshis versus Hindu Indians, and so forth.
Well,
Um,
I think the thing about this cultural exchange program is that it's helping everyone recognize that there's a commonality in all of us to serve and to care and to show that we can help each other in a way that's common to each other. Like Riker can show up on the by Riker showing up on the pod and serving as he does, he shows other Klingons that one day someone can show up on the deck of their ship, a human, and be able to serve right along with them,
well,
and
and,
vice
and
versa.
and this probably gets into maybe a really important observation out of this, is that a lot of people, starting with myself, who've had the ability to travel to other countries and deal with other, different cultures, um, um, you realize that when you talk to a Chinese person in Jinan, Shandong province, they basically have the same desires for a good life with their family and for their children, just like we do. The way it's exercised is different, but the people, sitting down with the people over a meal, just like with the Klingons, it's very
Exactly.
common. Where we get into trouble is that we have to form governments that reflect our different laws and our different strategies and the competition. So, you can sit down with a Russian or a Chinese, people that we see as adversarial right now, and one on one, you get along with them fine. But then you move up to a level where you have to communicate through the geopolitics, the
Mm-hmm.
governmental agencies. That's where the conflict comes in, which is a real puzzle. Is how do you build from those person to person contacts that are so common, but not that, but and take that up to governmental levels, which it gets into the question of what sort of world challenge does humanity need to kind of bring it together. Is climate change going to do that? Did
I
the has the pandemic to some extent done that?
so my answer to that is I I've two things to say, and then I think we'll end it here. So if you don't
Sure,
mind, I'll end the show.
that's fine.
Um, so on the first point of like, I think for the most part, most of the human race is actually pretty unified in the fact that most of us, the majority, and I mean like the 99%. And sorry, folks, I this is Jay getting up on a soapbox. I was a proponent of Occupy Wall Street. I was a follower of Occupy Wall Street. If I could have shown up at the time to like gotten arrested in Zuccotti Park, those people were fucking heroes in my book. And when Occupy Wall Street happened, it woke me up to the fact that the majority of the people want to go about their day. They want to take care of their kids. They want to pay their bills. They want to go to sleep. They want to wake up the next day, and they want to worry about like living their life in dignity until the moment they find out they're not going to be living that long, and then they want to be able to figure out how to reach their end in the most dignified way too. I think the majority of us, 99.9% of us in this world, want that. I think that's our common day. We want to take care of each other, we want to take care of
Yes,
ourselves, and we want to take care of
yes.
our kids.
Whether you're an American or Chinese, it's the same.
Chinese, Indian, Laos, South African, I think across the world, the majority of us just want to like get on with our days.
Right.
I think the
Yes.
real problem has come about where so that's the first part. I think the majority of us want to get along. And when I mean the majority of us, I mean the vast majority of us, because I, I'm going to pull out some random statistics, folks, but take this into account. If you really look at the amount of people that are considered sociopaths or psychopaths, it's less than 1%. It really is. So that means that a large portion of society is basically normal functioning people that don't want to be violent, who don't want to do anything wrong to anyone, that basically we all want to leave each other alone. It's usually a very, very small percentage of the people that are your actual rapists and murderers and tyrants and Genghis Khans, even though Genghis Khan is not all of the things I just said. But that's a different podcast. Um, I think what the problem that we have is that there's a power structure on top of us that's not even built on establishing like a racist order or a sexual hierarchy or even like keeping patriarchy going. I think that there's a order on top of us that's just built on making a dollar and making sure that certain people can keep making a dollar, and that the power of that dollar allows them access and the ability to do certain things. For example, Jeff Bezos is just
I
resigned as the chair of
yes.
Amazon, and I think a month or so, he's going up into space, while his employees are pissing in the bottles and not and being investigated by their own employees if they even say anything about labor rights.
Be- Amazon and Jeff Bezos, they have the highest turnover rate of just about any company because Bezos believes that if people stay in a company too long, they'll get lazy. So he
Yeah,
wants a high turnover rate so he can get the maximum profit out of each worker bee. And
it
it's like, it makes it. I read that article this morning about him in the New York Times,
it
and
treats everyone as being disposable.
yes, I hope the fucking rocket goes up and keeps going.
But the point I'm trying to make is that, like, I really do think that we are living in a system right now that is feudalistic in nature, and I often use the term neo-feudalism because, it's not like classical feudalism where you're going to have lords and vassals and knights in armor showing up to beat up the populace. You're going to have people that have digital networks and AIs controlling us and our content and what we see and what we talk about. And there will be very few people with power. And I think that we're seeing that now when you see people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates buying up large swaths of land all over the
What's
world.
what's what's the difference between them and the Communist Chinese Party?
Nothing. Nothing. They're autocrats. They're both
Yeah,
autocrats. And
right.
that's the point we're getting to. Like, there's an autocratic system at play across the world that disguises itself as capitalist, as democratic, as communist, as oligarchs, as Russian, Chinese, American, Nicaraguan, Azerbaijani, or Turkish. The point that I'm trying to make is that autocrats are rising, and the people that are keeping us down are these autocrats. And these autocrats come in the form of tyrants, they come in the form of bankers, and they come in the form of CEOs of companies that tell your mama that she has to pay $500 for her fucking asthma inhaler when they know that they could give it to her for fucking 10 cents. Like, that's the problem that we're facing here. We're facing a cabal of honest to God villains that are here in places like New York, they're in places like London, they're in Seattle, they're in Tokyo, they're in Hong Kong. We are facing a cabal of devils that use money as permission to get away with murder.
And
And
they're in Washington because a lot of people there are just bought off.
but the point I'm trying to make is that 99.9% of us aren't
I
those
got you.
devils. The rest of
Right,
us just want to get along with our
right.
day, and I think that's the problem. We've we've been taught to point at each other and say, "Oh, it's the Mexican crossing the border that's somehow taking my job." It's not the Mexican crossing the border. It's your fucking boss selling your job to the Chinese again. That's fucking taking your job. The Mexican is just trying to save his family just like you're trying to save yours.
I'll make one last comment, then you can end it up. But it's like everybody says, "Oh, China's stealing our jobs." China's not stealing our jobs.
No.
American companies are moving the jobs over there so they can make more money.
Exactly.
So they can provide a return on investment to their stockholders.
And we should be honest about what's being said here. Like, the American CEOs that do this, they're not Americans, as far as I'm concerned. They're traitors to this country. They would rather give away American wealth and American prosperity and American futures so they can pad their own pockets. And on that, thank you everyone for joining us for another episode of Where No Bubs has gone before.
Good night,
Uh,
Jay.
good night, Dad. I'm
Right.
sorry, folks. We'll be back next time for Star Trek season season 2, episode 9. I think that one is that the dolphin?
It's the
Sorry, I don't think it's the Dauphine. No,
no,
it's the measure of a man.
a
Oh,
measure of a man. Yeah,
so
good one.
everyone, on
Another
that
good one.
impassioned ending, we'll see you in a little bit. The next episode is a very special one, so Jake and I have to
Yes.
sit down and talk about it. But we'll
Yeah.
see you all soon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good night,
Bye,
Jay.
Dad.
Bye bye.
Night.